It was July 2015 in Long Beach, California, and let me tell you, it was a different time, brothers and sisters, a different time. I myself was a homeowner then, before COVID, before I lost it all to foreclosure and eviction. I was a proud homeowner, and I had opened my home to Frank. I was introduced to Frank by the nonprofit Church World Service. I was introduced to Church World Service by my church, First Congregational Church of Long Beach. First Church and other Long Beach churches and synagogues had banded together to find hosts for a group of Ugandans. Church World Service was shepherding these Ugandans over to the United States as part of a State Department initiative. The initiative was to help, wait for it, lesbian and gay people who were seeking asylum because the governments in their home countries were jailing LGBTQ people or subjecting them to capital punishment. Like I said, it was a different time. And on this particular day, July 15th, Frank was due to arrive at the condo I owned to occupy the room I had prepared for him, only he didn't. Frank didn't come because I called Church World Service and told them that Frank could not come today because I myself was not even staying in my condo today because my condo had no electricity. From my balcony, it looked like nobody in downtown Long Beach had electricity. Reports later stated that 30,700 Southern California Edison customers lost power on July 15, 2015. That power remained off for 4 days for some and 5 days for others. Church World Service had to scramble to find other accommodations for many of the Ugandans who were getting off planes from out of state and headed, they thought, to host homes in Long Beach. Restaurants had to pay big money to rent generators so they could keep their refrigerators and freezers going so as not to lose thousands of dollars worth of stock. But they didn't have many customers because the parking garages they depended on were not running due to the blackout. So they were paying for generators but not generating revenue for 5 days. I made out okay, actually. Frank did eventually move in, and he was a good roommate for some months until he got himself sorted and got his own apartment. I had gone to Costco and Vons on July 14th. I had paid by debit card, so even though I had discarded my receipts, I was able to contact Costco and Vons. With my debit card, the location of the store I had visited, and the date, they were able to print new receipts for me. I turned these receipts in to Southern California Edison and was reimbursed for the food that went bad in my non-electrified refrigerator. A friend of mine had a business in her home. She let me stay with her while the electricity was out at my condo. She wrote me an invoice for my stay. The invoice was in the name of her business. I submitted the invoice as a hotel stay to Southern California Edison, and they reimbursed me. I split the money with my friend. But I heard about people who bought their groceries with cash or with food stamps who also discarded their receipts but were not able to get reprints. I heard of people who didn't have friends or relatives nearby who could accommodate their entire family, so for 5 days they actually had to spend gas money driving back and forth between their tia's house in whatever city, however far away, and their job in Long Beach. Only their tia didn't own a business from which she could invoice them, so they could turn that document in as a hotel invoice and get reimbursed by Southern California Edison. So for them, it was all hardship with no recompense. This particular blackout was caused not by stress on the electrical grid, but by a cable splice failure and other malfunctions in the underground electrical system, which caused explosions and fires in electrical vaults. But what if I told you that because of the recently passed Big Beautiful Bill, Long Beach and all of California were going to see many more blackouts and more brownouts with more frequency, specifically because of stress on the grid, tied to high demand and more frequent extreme weather events? And what if I told you that California leaders, no matter how poorly us voters speak about them, were genuinely trying to address the issue of grid resiliency for our state? And what if I told you that the Port of Long Beach was intimately involved in a project related to California grid resilience, and that the project, while noble, should be abandoned? You're listening to the Adreana and Alison show. Alison is away. This is Adreana Langston in Long Beach, California, and in this episode, we'll be talking about grid resiliency, renewable energy, and why the Port of Long Beach should give up on offshore wind. All this and more right after the break. You're listening to the Adreana and Alison show. This is Adreana in Long Beach, California. And let me ask you, have you ever been downtown? Of course you have. Everybody's been to downtown Long Beach. Hell, Lana Del Rey wrote a song about Ocean Boulevard. Well, in downtown Long Beach, there sits the World Trade Center right there on Ocean Boulevard at Golden. Can you see it in your mind's eye? Think of how tall it is. The World Trade Center is 397 feet tall. Now think of the last time you took that drive to Palm Springs, the 91 to the 60 to the 10 to the 111. So I don't know about you, but I play this mind trick when I drive to Palm Springs. When I take any road trip I've taken many times before, really. I'll put on an audiobook or a podcast. I can recommend a good one, hint, hint. So I put on an audiobook or a podcast and I let my ears just get engrossed in what I'm listening to while my eyes keep on the road. I'm not hyper-focused on where I'm going because I know where I'm going. I've gone there many, many times before. Until I leave the 10 for the 111 and I can see Windy Cove, that wind turbine farm right alongside the 111. When I see those wind turbines, I snap out of focusing on my audiobook or whatever, and I start focusing on the road signs. Because I don't own a place in Palm Springs. I don't own a place anywhere, actually. So every time I go to Palm Springs, I'm going to a different hotel or Airbnb, and I have to pay attention to specific exits. Those familiar Windy Cove wind turbines are my brain's cue to come back into focus. Those turbines, which have a capacity of about 12 megawatts, are up to 500 feet tall, so taller than the World Trade Center building. A 12 megawatt wind turbine can support about 3,600 average U.S. homes. Now, how many of you have been to Paris, France? I went as an American Field Service exchange student when I was 17 years old. What an eye-opening experience. Parents, if you can afford to offer your children travel experiences, do it. It really influences their perspective on the world. One of the things I remember about Paris is how big the Eiffel Tower actually was when I got to see it personally. All the posters and postcards just did not prepare my mind for the scale. The Eiffel Tower is 1,063 feet tall, so over twice as tall as the World Trade Center here in downtown Long Beach. Well, the Port of Long Beach is planning to be an integral part of a multi-port assembly line that will launch 25 megawatt wind turbines into the deep ocean. A 25 megawatt wind turbine can support 6,250 average U.S. homes and stands over 1,100 feet tall. That's taller than the Eiffel Tower. The blades on these wind turbines will be 300 feet, just 60 feet short of a football field. These things are going to be massive. That's why the plan is to have two ports, the Port of Long Beach and a port in Humboldt, California, assemble the turbines themselves and the gargantuan floating platforms on which they are supposed to sit.
And you can talk about windmills. They litter our country. They're littered all over our country like dropping paper, like dropping garbage in a field, and that's what happens to them because in a period of time they turn to garbage. Most expensive energy ever.
The Port of Long Beach is embarking on an ambitious plan to help reduce California's reliance on fossil fuels while creating jobs and economic opportunities in the growing renewable energy industry. Welcome to Pier Wind, our proposal to develop the largest facility specifically designed to accommodate the assembly of offshore wind turbines in the United States. The proposed facility would span up to 400 acres of newly built land, located southwest of the Long Beach International Gateway Bridge within the Harbor District. The proposed terminal includes heavy lift wharves, supporting large cranes to receive and handle large offshore wind components, and construct the world's largest floating offshore wind turbine systems. As a deep-water port, Long Beach is capable of accommodating vessels carrying the heavy and large-scale components required to assemble the offshore wind turbines. The facility would not impact other port operations. With its highly skilled and diversified local workforce, Long Beach offers the ideal location for Pier Wind, which would generate new jobs in maritime operations, manufacturing, and construction. At Pier Wind, workers would assemble offshore wind turbines standing taller than the Eiffel Tower, helping California meet climate goals while offering exciting career opportunities in the growing renewable energy industry for residents of communities surrounding the Port of Long Beach. Pier Wind holds the key to meeting California's goal of producing 25 gigawatts of offshore wind power by 2045. And helping the state deliver renewable energy sources for zero-emissions technologies coming online at the Port of Long Beach and elsewhere. When completed, the fully assembled floating wind turbines would be towed by sea from the Port of Long Beach to the offshore wind farms located more than 20 miles from the coast in federal waters in Central and Northern California, where the wind is consistently strong. A conceptual design and assessment is scheduled for completion in 2023, as the port seeks funding from state and federal sources to support Pier Wind.
Yeah, the Port of Long Beach is making a lot of optimistic projections about the Pier Wind project. All the turbines combined are projected to produce enough electricity to support 25 million homes per year. The project is projected to create 1,400 permanent jobs for maintenance of the turbines. The port is not making these projections unilaterally. The port is deep in it with the California Energy Commission, which has an entire strategic plan to make offshore wind a major part of California's zero-emission goals and grid resiliency. The state has already committed tens of millions of dollars in funding to the port in Humboldt and to the Port of Long Beach for this project. If you haven't checked out the California Energy Commission strategic plan, you should. I read the overview, and if I could understand the gist, believe me, it's not too technical for you. If you're an environmental policy wonk, you're going to really dig it. It's a good plan. Pier Wind is a good initial project. $8 billion in projected labor income, 4,200 average annual jobs during construction setup phase, and 1,800 jobs during the turbine assembly phase. Plus a projected 17,000 permanent jobs statewide for the direct maintenance of the turbines and all the connected supply chain jobs. This is Hoover Dam and Tennessee Valley Authority level infrastructure. And believe me, it's destined to be thwarted.
And you know, you can talk about windmills. They litter our country. They're littered all over our country like dropping paper, like dropping garbage in a field, and that's what happens to them, because in a period of time they turn to garbage. Most expensive energy ever. They only work if you get subsidy. The only people that want them are the people that are getting rich off windmills, getting massive subsidies from the U.S. government, and it's the most expensive energy there is. It's many, many times more expensive than clean natural gas. So we're going to try and have a policy where no windmills are being built. You know, off the coast of New Jersey, they want to build like 200 windmills. The people are going crazy. Nobody wants them, and they're very expensive. They don't work without subsidy. You don't want energy that needs subsidy. Energy is a good business. You don't need subsidy. But when you build these massive towers, I mean, they're 25 stories tall, 40 stories. They have one 70 stories tall. The blades, they take 3 ships to ship them. It's crazy. They're dangerous. You see what's happening up in the Massachusetts area with the whales, where they had 2 whales wash ashore in, I think, a 17-year period. And now they had 14 this season. The windmills are driving the whales crazy, obviously.
What you just heard was President Trump shortly after he was inaugurated. The antagonism you heard toward wind energy, it doesn't stop with verbal jabs. President Trump has weaponized federal government policy against wind energy in a number of ways. The same day Trump was sworn into office as president, he signed an executive order supposedly pausing all federal wind permits. Why do I say supposedly pausing? Because Trump's administration has provided absolutely no timeline for lifting the pause. So it's really not a pause at this point. It's a full stop that the Trump administration is just calling a pause. The Trump administration is nitpicking away at wind projects that are already permitted to use federally controlled ocean land. On July 7, 2025, as a matter of fact, Trump administration's Environmental Protection Agency announced that it would make a major offshore wind project, U.S. Wind, redo part of the permitting process because of a procedural issue. Trump's Interior Department full-on brags about cutting the solar and wind energy industries off at the knees. Here's a quote from a July 2025 Interior Department report. The Department of Interior will eliminate long-standing right-of-way and capacity fee discounts for existing and future wind and solar projects, bringing an end to years of subsidies for economically unviable energy development. Trump administration agencies are actively trying to take away financing from solar and wind projects. In January 2025, the Office of Management and Budget tried to pause all federal financial assistance for climate-related projects, and Trump's EPA tried to suspend clean energy disbursements. Now, both of these efforts were met with legal challenges. AstroTurf groups are getting in on the attacks. Oil and coal-backed groups are using lawsuits to try and claw back federal funding already delivered to wind energy projects by the previous Biden administration. In June 2025, groups aligned with the National Offshore Wind Opposition Alliance petitioned U.S. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy to rescind the 2024 grant to Humboldt Bay Harbor, citing a directive from President Trump to reassess federal wind energy project approvals and labeling the grant a misappropriation of federal funds. Humboldt Bay Harbor is the port that's supposed to be assembling turbines for the Pier Wind project along with the Port of Long Beach. In fact, since Trump got elected, federally permitted offshore wind energy projects in New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Virginia have been hit by new legal actions by these same oil and coal aligned groups. The Trump administration frequently joining the case on the side of the plaintiffs. The cynicism of these lawsuits is as thick as molasses. The plaintiffs claim that the permits given to these offshore wind energy projects were not properly reviewed for environmental impact. Did you catch that? Oil and coal-backed groups are suing to have permits pulled for offshore wind turbine renewable energy projects under the auspices of improper environmental review. This is a podcast, so you can't see me rolling my eyes, but ugh. Investors are pulling back from wind energy because of the Trump administration regulatory and policy attacks. In a May 2025 article Inside Climate News claimed that in 2025, $14 billion worth of investment in clean energy projects had been canceled. Developer RWE withdrew from the U.S. offshore wind project in 2025 after sinking $1 billion in getting leases for New York, California, and Louisiana. Shell withdrew in January 2025 from its offshore wind Atlantic Shores project after also spending $1 billion. Vineyard Wind shelved its Connecticut project in December 2024 after Trump got elected. Total Energy said the month after the election that it would not pursue further U.S. offshore wind investments in the short term, citing poor market conditions. Developers and investors see the writing on the wall. The Port of Long Beach and the state of California should take a lesson. The Port of Long Beach should specifically take a lesson because in the recently passed Big Beautiful Bill, there are 3 bitch slaps just for the port. Suzanne Plazia is Senior Director / Chief Harbor Engineer for the Port of Long Beach. She was interviewed in September 2023 by the American Journal of Transportation. In that interview, she stated that the Port of Long Beach has a port readiness plan listing all the domestic manufacturers from whom the port would be sourcing the components for Pier Wind. She went on to say that at first, the parts would be sourced from Asia. She also went on to say that the financing of the $4.7 billion project would be a mix of state, federal, and private money. I'm going to break all of that down so I can show you more clearly how the Trump administration is trying to tear all of it down. I already talked to you about the financing part, where the Trump administration is actively trying to not pay federal money that was promised to wind energy projects by the Biden administration. I already talked to you about how the Trump administration is joining lawsuits waged by oil and coal-backed groups to claw back federal money already awarded to wind energy projects. But there's even more nefarious financing and sourcing obstacles built into the Big Beautiful Bill directed squarely at the wind and solar industries. Okay, focus with me because this is about to get a little wonky. But you're my listeners, So I know I can speak to you while in the weeds a little bit because you're just that smart. Grants are one way the federal government finances energy projects. The other way that the federal government finances energy projects is by crafting tax legislation in a way that makes investors want to seek out certain investments because the tax write-offs from those investments are so rich. Those tax incentives are a big, big, big part of how wind and solar energy projects attract investors. The Big Beautiful Bill guts the tax incentives outright for wind and solar. But the Big Beautiful Bill also has these 3 provisions regarding the tax incentive part, and I'm going to talk about them. The first one is specified foreign entity provision. It's also called the foreign controlled entities provision. No specified foreign entity and no foreign controlled entity is allowed to claim the tax credits associated with investing in a clean energy project. And how does the Big Beautiful Bill describe these specified foreign or foreign controlled entities? They are described as any entity, including a U.S. entity, that is more than 50% owned directly or indirectly by the Chinese government or an agency or instrumentality thereof, an entity organized under the laws of China, an entity with its principal place of business in China, or a Chinese citizen or national. Okay, so you're like, no money from China. Big deal. In fact, that may even appeal to you. Now, let me tell you about a foreign influenced entity, which is also excluded from claiming the tax credit for clean energy investment. If the government of China or any Chinese national owns 25% or more of the entity, can appoint any board members or executive officers to the entity, or is owed at least 15% of the debt that entity carries, that entity is considered a foreign influence entity. Do you know how many manufacturing entities, not outright located in China and not outright run by Chinese people, nevertheless have loans from Chinese banks or have investments from Chinese super rich people? It's a lot, brothers and sisters. It's a lot. China owns 3% to 6% of all the debt carried in the United States as a whole. According to an International Energy Agency report from 2024, Chinese investment accounts for 1/3 of clean energy investments worldwide. Good luck getting financing for wind and solar projects where the financing structure isn't deeply supported by Chinese money. This provision was specifically crafted to make it difficult for wind and solar to get investors while remaining in compliance with the law. But wait, there's more. There's also a material assistance limitation provision. Whale is a legal firm that specializes in providing legal analysis for the construction and development industries. Whale wrote an analysis of the Big Beautiful Bill. The July 8th, 2025 analysis stated this about the material assistance limitation provision. It is unclear whether non-Chinese supply chains are sufficiently robust to permit compliance with this limitation, particularly in the case of solar and energy storage projects, nor does it seem likely that multinationals will continue to bring manufacturing onshore in light of current U.S. energy policy and the broader macroeconomic climate. So, like I said, 3 bitch slaps deep in the Big Beautiful Bill. While Trump is leading the attacks against wind and solar energy, I want you to understand that Trump did not instigate these attacks. GOP legislators in D.C., in the majority, have an ideological bias against wind and solar energy. To get a feel for how ideological the animosity is from the GOP towards wind and solar, listen to this excerpt from the July 25th, 2025 episode of the podcast, The Ezra Klein Show. The guests were 2 climate specialists, Jesse Jenkins, who is a leading climate modeler and a professor at Princeton University, where he runs the Princeton Zero Lab, and Jane Flegel, who is the executive director of the Blue Horizons Foundation and served on the Biden administration's climate policy team.
You get the Big Beautiful Bill. What does that do to that set of programs? What is gone? What is left?
Yeah.
And what sort of new problems have emerged?
Yeah. So, and Jesse should jump in here because he's in the weeds probably more than anyone I know. But the most significant damage in that bill for clean energy was to solar and wind, specifically, where the Republicans were quite punitive, actually, which really shortened the timeline for solar and wind. Anyone who's tried to build a large-scale piece of energy infrastructure will tell you the work and time to get even to commence construction takes years. I mean, it's a very long process. So what it means is that that tax incentive is no longer sending a long-term signal to the market that there will be incentives for them to build. Instead, we have this like mad rush to try to get to commence construction.
Okay, so we've just decided to, as best we can, wreck the solar and wind industries going forward.
I mean, they even tried to go beyond that with the initial Senate draft, adding in a new tax, not just ending the tax cuts that basically lowered the cost of wind and solar by somewhere between 30 and 50%. So we've just raised taxes 50% on wind and solar, our biggest forms of new electricity generation. They actually proposed an excise tax on top of that to further penalize wind and solar beyond 2027.
With this level of Trump administration animosity towards wind energy, it seems less than prudent for the Port of Long Beach to go forward with the Pier Wind project. And I say this even as California state officials were, as recently as February 2025, talking very promisingly about staying the course with offshore wind in California. I don't think those officials are just pandering. They say they are looking at the long term and they think California's plans will outlast the Trump administration. They are probably correct. But I'm not confident that the country will soon recover from the Trump administration, nor am I certain my fellow Americans won't again vote into office someone with a strong disregard for the rule of law or the norms of not using the power of the law for vindictiveness or personal gain, or a non-science-based prejudice against wind and solar energy. I think there are ways for California to keep pushing forward with its zero emissions goals using energy sources for which the Trump administration has not shown such outright antagonism. And I'm going to talk about those right after the break. This is the Alison and Adreana show. Alison is away, and this is Adreana Langston in Long Beach, California. We're talking about pivoting from Pier Wind to other alternative energies for California and Long Beach. While the Big Beautiful Bill did gut tax incentives for wind and solar energy, it did not gut tax incentives for all clean energy initiatives. If an electricity producer can claim it is zero emissions, it's still eligible for the investment tax credit for clean energy. Again, as long as it is not wind or solar. Well, it just so happens that good old Long Beach, California has at its disposal two forms of zero emissions energy generation that are not wind and not solar. And one of them is already being piloted right at the Port of Los Angeles.
And produces clean electricity from ocean waves. Waves have a tremendous amount of energy, so why not harness it?
We visited the Port of Los Angeles to find out how it works. This technology is cost-effective, reliable, and does not negatively impact the surrounding marine environment.
The rising and falling motion of the waves moves the metal floats up and down. This movement builds pressure in the hydraulic pistons, like pumping air into a tire with a bicycle pump.
That pressure goes into these accumulator tanks. And then when you want the electricity, you let the power out of here and it spins a turbine. So you get stored intermittent renewables without a battery.
Being able to store renewable energy with pressure rather than a battery is revolutionary. These floaters, created by Eco Wave Power, are attached to existing breakwaters and jetties and the only thing touching the water is the metal floaters, massively reducing any maintenance required.
Nearly 2.4 billion people, about 40% of the global population, live within 100 kilometers of the coast, making this a great solution all around the world.
Share this video if you're excited by solutions like this.
EcoWave is the name of the company, and you can see their wave energy machines at Burst 70 in San Pedro right now. Their official unveiling to the public is September 9th, 2025. If you plan on being there, look for me. EcoWave was awarded a permit by the Port of Los Angeles in March 2025, and already their machines are up and running. That's pretty impressive. What else is impressive is how much cheaper EcoWave machines are as compared to wind energy turbines. No ships are needed, nor divers, nor underwater moorings, nor cables. The machinery does not have to be as robust as offshore machinery, where the ocean can be very, very rough. The machinery is made to attach to a jetty or a breakwater or a concrete pier where the grid infrastructure is already right there to accept the generated electricity. The actual machinery for EcoWave's Port of Los Angeles project is produced right here in California by a woman-owned company, so none of the federal restrictions on sourcing will be an obstacle. The EcoWave pilot project will be small. It will only generate enough electricity to power about 80 homes. But once the proof of concept is proven, it is not that challenging to scale. You just build more of these floating machines and deploy them along the Long Beach Breakwater Jetty and any available berths at the Port of Long Beach and Los Angeles. But the best part of wave energy is if the Port of Long Beach or the City of Long Beach were to deploy it, it is a lot less likely that the federal government would be all up in the city's business. The floating machines at the heart of EcoWave attach at jetties, ports, and breakwaters, not on federal ocean land where permits are needed. Because it is installed right in the built environment on or near the shore, interference with marine life is also not an issue. So the environmental regulations the Trump administration is currently cynically using to thwart offshore wind projects would be less likely to apply. Onshore wave energy's relative affordability makes it easier for municipalities wanting to deploy it to find enough investors to fund projects. The EcoWave pilot project is located at Burst 70 at the Port of Los Angeles, but the Port of LA does not run the project. The EcoWave machines are being hosted by a nonprofit called AltC. It was the AltC CEO you heard in the video explaining how the energy is stored with pressure rather than a battery. AltC is a business incubator for startups in the ocean-based climate change solution industry. The Port of Long Beach and the City of Long Beach would be extremely wise to pay close attention to the EcoWave pilot program and to begin a partnership with EcoWave right away. Just like the EcoWave technology uses pressure to store power instead of using a battery, so does the second form of readily available clean energy at Long Beach's disposal.
Normal hydropower is created by storing water on high ground and running it downhill to spin a turbine at the bottom. Once the water's passed one or more turbines, it flows on out to sea. Pumped hydro captures and stores water in two places, with a steep drop in between. Water can be pumped uphill to reuse for power generation again and again. Of course, that pumping consumes electricity in itself. That's where wind and solar power come in. Pumped hydro, wind and solar complement each other beautifully, providing a stable, reliable, clean energy system. When the wind blows and the sun shines, but people aren't using much power, excess wind and solar power is available to pump water back up into storage. At other times, when the wind and sunlight aren't generating enough power to meet demand, the pumped hydropower system swings into action and makes up the shortfall. The whole system works together like a giant renewable battery, providing the storage, reliability and flexibility that wind and solar can't offer on their own.
You know those 3 oil islands off the coast of Long Beach? Well, they haven't been used for actually extracting petroleum from the ground for some time. In fact, they are used to put water in the ground in order to keep parts of Long Beach from sinking. But the city of Long Beach is on the verge of decommissioning the islands, which are called THUMS Islands. The city has even solicited input from Long Beach residents on what to do with the islands. The THUMS Islands could be perfectly repurposed for pump hydroelectricity. Heck, they're doing the pumping of water into the ground right now. So half the setup is already complete. In fact, Bob Dowell, the city's director of energy resources, even mentioned using the THUMS Islands for this pumped hydro in an article about the future uses of Long Beach THUMS oil islands. Let me read part of the interview aloud. Dowell said that electricity generation is also a possibility. That process would include pressurizing underground aquifers with water and allowing it to rise up through an impeller at night when electricity is in high demand, but solar is not an option. That could provide the city with a new source of clean energy. But all of these ideas are conceptual as of now. Okay, so Dowell is actually talking about generating electricity directly from the pressure, like what EcoWave does. But the underlying principle aligns with pumped hydro, where one would pump water into an underground aquifer until the aquifer is so stuffed with water it is under high pressure. Then one would release the water through turbines to generate electricity when needed. You already heard by the accent in the video clip that I played that the pumped hydro is already in use in Australia. But did you know it's already being workshopped at municipalities here in Southern California? The San Diego County Water Authority, in partnership with the City of San Diego, is evaluating the feasibility of developing a pumped storage energy project at the San Vicente Reservoir. Lancaster is working with a $2 million grant from the California Energy Commission to fund a demonstration of an aquifer pumped hydro system. The project is intended to help understand APH, aquifer pumped hydro, and define its value and benefits, especially for disadvantaged and low-income communities. The design and construction tasks on the Lancaster project are already completed, and it is nearly ready to launch. Pumped hydro storage may be cutting edge, but it is not so edgy that projects are 5 years or more out from being deployed. Using THUMS Islands for UPHS is a goal that could be reachable within fewer than 5 years after the THUMS Islands are decommissioned if the city of Long Beach were to quickly make a commitment to starting the project. And Long Beach needs to quickly make a commitment to pivot to some sort of renewable energy that isn't being attacked by the President of the United States. Energy prices for the average resident or business of Long Beach and California are going to rise. What's also going to rise is the occurrence of 2015-style Long Beach blackouts. Jesse Jenkins and Jane Flegel explain it in that Ezra Klein podcast episode I referenced earlier.
What the Republicans have basically done is ensure that we're going to deploy less new electricity, that the new electricity we deploy is more expensive, and that because of that, we rely more on existing coal and gas plants that weren't otherwise used. So we're going to be paying more for new clean electricity and paying more to use dirty old power plants and raising the risk that we're not able to keep up with demand growth, all because we've raised taxes on the most important sources of new electricity.
You gestured at this a minute ago, but we've been talking a lot about the effect of all this on decarbonization. What about the effect on the energy bills people pay?
Yeah, I mean, this is really quite brutal. I don't know if I have the numbers on the top of my head, but there have been a bunch of analyses that large electricity buyers and others have done, independent analysts, of the impact on electricity rates associated with repeal of the IRA. And they are significant and they vary across the country. But in some cases, I think
it's on the order of like 15% on average, a 15% increase in retail bills. But of course, that can be 2% in some states and 30% in other states.
Yeah, some of the states
it's quite
are as
substantial.
High as 30. I mean, it's really quite bad. And we're in a moment, as you know, where affordability and cost of living is quite top of mind for
supposedly for the
US.
President, but also for everybody. The other thing that's going to happen, though, is because we're deploying less electric vehicles, we're going to consume more gasoline nationally and diesel, and that's going to drive up prices at the pump too. The estimates are that could be on the order of, a 5% increase in gasoline prices. So another way to think about it is that Republicans just voted for a 5% gas tax, right, by slowing the deployment of EVs, right? And so none of this stuff makes good economic sense, even if you don't care about climate.
They also warn of brownout and blackout grid failures in response to extreme weather events, which will grow more frequent as climate change continues to wreak havoc. Earlier in 2025, Governor Newsom and the California State Legislature set aside $25 million for Rob Bonta to file lawsuits against the Trump administration and the federal agencies. And I'm here for it. I am. Right now, Rob Bonta, Letitia James, and 15 other state AGs are taking the Trump administration to court, saying Trump doesn't have the authority to halt project permitting, and also arguing that doing so jeopardizes the state's economies, energy mix, public health, and climate goals. And as of June 2025, a federal judge has ruled against the Trump administration when the administration asked that the case be dismissed. As a Californian, I'm proud of Bonta for standing up to an executive branch that is overreaching its authority. I'm proud, but not hopeful. I've seen the Trump administration wantingly disobey judges' orders. I've seen the Trump administration use stall tactics. I've seen the Supreme Court give Trump's executive branch sweeping authority that other legal scholars are hard-pressed to explain without calling the Supreme Court's conservative justices captured by Trumpism. In the best case scenario, the House and Senate swing back to the Democratic majorities after the midterms, and the legislative branch of government reasserts its authority. But then what? The Trump administration has so gutted the federal agencies or so stocked them with right-wing ideologues that I do not believe federal money will start flowing back to the states anytime soon, even if the midterms result in a Democratic landslide. I do not believe federal permits for ocean areas will start flowing anytime soon after a DNC midterm victory either. The administrative state will need time to be built back up. Trump did what he's doing by getting a GOP-led Congress to pass his big, beautiful bill and by signing executive orders. A Democratic-led Congress could write and pass legislation to nullify each one of Trump's executive orders and could also write legislation to void all of the big, beautiful bill. But even doing something as straightforward as that would take time. And that projected $4.7 billion budget for Pier Wind? Those projections were modeled before the tariff regime installed by Trump. Now, no matter what the midterms bring, the executive branch does indeed have the authority to set tariffs. So whatever financing the managers of the Pier 1 project thought they needed will have to be increased as long as these Trump tariffs are in place. But what for sure will start happening even before the midterms is those cost of living increases Jenkins and Flagel explained. Because the increase in demand for electricity is happening now with the exponential growth of AI. The slowdown in EV sales and the slowdown in clean energy projects is happening now as the attacks by the Trump administration continue. There are many, many people in Long Beach, California suffering right now under the high cost of living. The website for the California Department of Housing and Community Development states that in 2021, an estimated 43% of all households are cost burdened in Long Beach, California. Cost burden means paying more than 30% of their monthly income towards a rent or a mortgage. Grocery prices have not decreased the way Trump promised they would if he won. Long Beach leaders and Port of Long Beach leaders would really be turning a blind eye to the naked need in Long Beach if they chose to ignore a pivot to a clean energy solution at their doorstep that might keep blackouts or brownouts from happening and might help keep electricity prices low. I'd personally love to see them pivot all the way to a clean energy municipal power, but that's reaching. There has already been $21 million spent on the Pier Wind project, but sunk costs are not a reason to keep going forward. In fact, having only spent $21 million is a great reason to pause the Pier Wind project now. California had already spent $15 billion on high-speed rail when Trump came into office and clawed back the $4 billion promised in federally funding, effectively killing the project. Since Trump is dead set against wind energy, the Pier Wind project should be paused now at $21 million spent rather than spending even more only to have the Trump administration find some way to kill the project altogether. California can and will win the war on emissions. Long Beach, California, and the Port of Long Beach in particular can and will continue to be innovative leaders in clean energy. Pivoting away from the particular battle for offshore wind and towards other readily available renewables that can be implemented right here in Long Beach is a savvy move in winning the overall war. This has been the Adreana and Alison podcast, and I'm Adreana Langston in Long Beach, California. If you got something out of this podcast, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And like the intro song says, if you need receipts, I've got stacks and stacks. Check out the video description for a link to my article on which this podcast episode is based. You'll find links to sources for all of the claims I make in the article. Be sure to let me know your thoughts about California's clean energy future in the comments, and make sure to hit that subscribe button.